If you play this piano, I'll marry you." Arthur Montenegro's words hung in the air, exuding the boredom and arrogance of someone who owns the world but finds no fascination in it. He was leaning against the bar of his own penthouse in Leblon, a glass of single malt whiskey in his hand, observing the guests at his party. They were the same faces, the same inane conversations, the same calculated laughter. In the center of the living room, pristine and majestic, stood the Fazioli Grand, a polished ebony giant whose value exceeded that of entire apartments in the same neighborhood. No one dared touch it. It was a museum piece, a status symbol, not an instrument. That was when his gaze fell on her. Helena, quiet, efficient, moving through the shadows of the party with a silver tray, collecting empty glasses. She was part of the furniture, invisible to most, but not to Arthur that night. He noticed the way her gaze lingered on the piano for a moment, a split second of yearning so profound it seemed to tear the veil of her professional indifference. It was that glimpse that had triggered him. The mockery was an impulse, a way to break the monotony. He projected his voice, the sound cutting through the chatter. Dozens of heads turned. Helena froze, her face suddenly hot with humiliation. Everyone's eyes were on her, the billionaire and the maid. The joke was obvious, cruel. Some laughed. Helena felt the weight of that universe of luxury and disdain on her shoulders. Her instinct was to flee, disappear into the kitchen, and wait for the floor to swallow her. But then, something older and stronger stirred within her, a spark of defiance. She lifted her chin, her brown eyes meeting Arthur's, gray and mocking, across the room. She placed the tray on a nearby table with a delicacy that belied the storm raging in her chest. She walked toward the piano, each step a thunderclap in her ears. The silence in the room grew dense, heavy. Arthur watched, a cynical smile forming on his lips, waiting for her to back away or play an awkward note to complete the humiliation. Helena sat on the leather bench. Her hands, accustomed to heavy work, trembled slightly. She took a deep breath, closed her eyes for a moment, and then opened them, focusing solely on the 88 keys before her. And she played. It wasn't a simple melody. It was Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor. The first notes rang out, hesitant, as if testing the waters, and then the music exploded. The living room vanished. The mockery, the guests, the arrogant billionaire, everything dissolved in the torrent of sound. Helena's hands danced over the keyboard, a force of nature. There was fury in those notes, the frustration of years pent up. There was pain, the memory of a dream abandoned. There was a beauty so pure and overwhelming that it made the air vibrate. The guests were transfixed. Arthur Montenegro's smile faded, replaced by an expression of utter shock. He straightened, the glass of whiskey forgotten in his hand. This wasn't the music of an amateur. It was the performance of a master, a goddess. Each note was perfect, charged with an emotion he, in his 33 years of privileged life, had never felt. The music told a story, her story. The journey of a soul that had been silenced, but that had never, ever forgotten how to sing. When the last note resounded and faded into the stunned silence of the room, no one moved. Helena remained motionless for a moment, her chest heaving. Then, slowly, she rose, gave a barely perceptible curtsy, not to the audience, but to the piano, and without looking at Arthur, turned and walked back to the kitchen, leaving behind a man whose mocking promise now weighed like an anvil on her conscience. The party ended in a confused murmur. The guests left, casting curious glances at Arthur, who had remained motionless near the bar for nearly an hour, staring at Fazioli as if he were an apparition. The piano, once a decorative object, now pulsed with life, echoing the soul of the woman whose name he barely knew. The next day, the mansion was silent. Arthur woke with a headache that came not from the whiskey, but from the whirlwind of thoughts. Helena. Who was she? Where had that music come from? He went down to breakfast. Helena was there, serving coffee with the same discretion as always, her face impassive. It was as if the previous night had never happened. This normality irritated him more than anything else. He wanted her to confront him, to demand something, to break protocol. But she only said, "Good morning, Mr. Montenegro." The formality was a wall of ice. "Helena," he began, his voice huskier than he intended. She looked at him, waiting. The words died in his throat. What could he say? "Congratulations? Where did you learn to play like that? By the way, about that marriage proposal." It all sounded absurd. He opted for the path he knew best. Money. "What you played yesterday was impressive," he said, trying to sound casual. "I'd like to offer you a tip, a bonus, for the performance." He expected gratitude, perhaps a smile. What he received was a cold stare that completely disarmed him. "I didn't play for money, sir," she replied, her voice low but firm. "I played because you challenged me. Humiliation was the price of admission. The music was my answer." She turned to leave. "Wait," he ordered, the authority in his voice returning by pure reflex. She paused, but didn't turn around. "That's not all. I want to know. Where did you learn?" There was a long pause. "That's not part of my job description, Mr. Montenegro," she finally said, and left the room, leaving him alone with his coffee and his wounded pride. Her refusal was a slap in the face. Arthur Montenegro wasn't used to not getting answers. He was a man who bought information, people, futures. That same afternoon, he called his security chief, a former federal agent named Bastos. The order was simple. Find out everything about Helena da Silva. Everything. As he waited, Arthur found himself watching her. He noticed things he'd never seen before. The way she arranged the books on the shelf with almost reverent care. The small scar near her eyebrow. The shadow of fatigue beneath her eyes, which the discreet makeup couldn't hide. She was no longer invisible. She was an enigma. And every time he passed Fazioli, he felt a pang of something he couldn't name. Remorse? Curiosity? Admiration? It was disconcerting. 2 days later, Bastos delivered a dossier. Arthur opened it in his office with the view of Guanabara Bay as a backdrop. The pages told a story that left him speechless for a long time. Helena da Silva, daughter of a seamstress and a bus driver. A prodigy. She had won a full scholarship to the UFRJ School of Music at 16. Professors' reviews described her as a generational talent, a pianist with the soul of a poet. She was destined for international stages. Then, at 20, everything stopped. Her mother was diagnosed with a rare and expensive degenerative disease. Her father had died years before. Helena abandoned university, her recitals, her dreams, to care for her mother. She sold the family piano. She began working 2, sometimes 3 jobs to pay for her treatments. Cleaning lady, waitress, and finally, a maid in Arthur Montenegro's house. Her mother had died 8 months earlier. Helena continued working to pay off her hospital debts. Arthur closed the file. The weight of those pages was greater than any financial report he had ever read. His cruel joke hadn't been just a joke. It had been a profanation. He had mocked a sacrifice he could barely comprehend. That night, he found her in the kitchen at the end of her shift. "Helena," he said, his voice devoid of any arrogance. She turned, surprised by his tone. "I know," he continued, "about the university, about your mother. I'm sorry." Her mask of indifference cracked for a second. A wave of pain flashed through her eyes before she controlled it. "You had no way of knowing." "That's no excuse," he insisted. "What I did was unforgivable. I wasn't mocking a maid. I was mocking an artist. And I was an idiot." Silence stretched between them. For the first time, they weren't the boss and the maid. They were just a man and a woman in a silent kitchen. "Why are you still here?" he asked, genuinely curious. "With your talent, you could—" "Life is not a stage, Mr. Montenegro," she interrupted, bitterness tinging her voice. "Bills need to be paid. Debts are real. Dreams don't pay rent." She grabbed her purse, ready to leave. "Let me help," he offered, the urge to solve everything with money returning. "I can pay off your debts. I can get you an audition, a sponsor. Anything." She paused in the doorway and glanced at him over her shoulder. "And what would be the price? What would you ask in return? That I play at your parties to entertain your wealthy friends? That I become another of your beautiful collectibles, like that piano in the living room?" The question hit him like a blow. Was that exactly what he would do? Would he turn her passion into just another transaction? The truth was, he didn't know. "I don't know," he admitted, with an honesty that surprised him. She gave a small nod, a mixture of sadness and understanding. "That's why I'm still here. Because here, at least, the rules are clear. I work, you pay me. There's nothing more." She left, leaving Arthur in even greater confusion. He, who had always known the value of everything, realized he had no idea what that woman was worth. And the promise he'd made, the absurd promise of marriage, echoed in his mind, no longer as a joke, but as a specter. The following weeks were marked by a subtle tension. Arthur tried to get closer, but he didn't know how. He began leaving music books on the coffee table, waiting for her to see them. He bought rare recordings of classical pianists. He left them playing quietly when he knew she was nearby. They were clumsy, almost childish attempts. Helena noticed every gesture. She saw the books, heard the music. Part of her was touched by the attempt, however clumsy. Another part, the wounded and cynical part, was suspicious. Billionaires don't change overnight. He wanted something. She just didn't know what. One day, he approached her in the garden. "I've been thinking," he began, "about that piano. It's a waste for it to sit there, silent. I'd like you to use it, whenever you want, when I'm not there, or even when I am. The house is big." Helena stared at him, trying to decipher his intentions. "Why?" "Because an instrument like that was made to be played by someone like you," he said simply. The sincerity in his voice was undeniable. From that day on, a new routine took hold. Sometimes, late at night, after her work was done, Helena would sit at the piano. She didn't play the grand, furious pieces of the first night. She played Satie, Debussy, soft, melancholic melodies that floated through the silent house. Arthur, in his upstairs office, would stop what he was doing and just listen. Music became their language, a bridge across the social chasm that separated them. He never interrupted her, never commented. He just listened. And through those notes, he began to know her. He heard her loneliness, her strength, her longing. And she, knowing he was listening, felt seen in a way she hadn't felt in years. Arthur's world began to feel increasingly hollow. His business, his friends, his fiancée. Ah, yes, there was a bride. Isabella Bittencourt, model, socialite, heiress. The perfect bride for the Montenegro clan. The engagement was more of a business arrangement than a romance, a union of empires. Isabella was rarely in Rio, living between Paris and Milan, but she was returning, and her arrival was like a storm gathering on the horizon. Isabella arrived at the penthouse on a sunny afternoon, exuding expensive perfume and disdain. She noticed the change in Arthur immediately. He was quieter, more thoughtful, and his attention seemed to drift to places she couldn't reach. The source of the drift became clear when, one afternoon, she descended the stairs and heard the sound of the piano. She saw Helena playing, completely absorbed. Arthur sat in an armchair in the corner of the room, simply watching, with an expression Isabella had never seen on his face. It was one of profound admiration. The venom of jealousy was instantaneous. "What is this?" Isabella asked, her voice sharp. The music stopped abruptly. Helena flinched, as if caught doing something wrong. Arthur stood. "Helena was playing, dear." "The maid?" Isabella laughed, a mirthless sound. "Since when are servants allowed to use your toys, Arthur? That piano is worth more than her entire life." The cruelty of the sentence hung in the air. Helena paled. Arthur felt a surge of fury. "Don't talk to her like that," he said, his voice dangerously calm. "Her name is Helena, and she has more talent in one finger than you and all your friends combined have in your entire body." Isabella gaped, shocked by his fierce defense. "Are you leaving me for the maid? Is that it? Are you mad?" The confrontation was inevitable. And there, in that room, with Helena as a silent witness, Arthur realized the truth. He wasn't mad. For the first time in a long time, he was sane. He looked at Isabella, her face polished, her life perfectly healed, and felt nothing. Then he looked at Helena, her face marked by life, pain, and sacrifice, and felt it all. "I think our arrangement no longer makes sense, Isabella," he said, with a finality that left no room for doubt. Isabella's departure was as dramatic as her arrival, full of threats and insults. When the door finally slammed, a heavy silence fell over the room. Helena finally moved. I'm sorry, sir. I didn't mean to cause trouble." "You didn't cause anything," Arthur said, approaching her. "You just showed me the truth. I was living a lie." He stopped in front of her. The closeness was electrifying. "That night," he began, his voice low, "I made a stupid promise, a cruel joke. But maybe the universe has a strange sense of humor." Helena looked up at him, her heart pounding. "You don't mean it." "I've never meant it so seriously in my entire life," he said. "I'm not offering marriage as a reward for a performance. That would be an insult. I'm asking for a chance to meet Helena da Silva. Not the pianist, not the maid, the woman. A chance to be worthy of the music you play." Helena stared at him, searching for any sign of mockery, of deception. But all she saw was raw vulnerability in the eyes of the man who, until recently, had seemed made of steel. She thought of her life, the sacrifices, the closed doors. She thought of the humiliation of that night and how she had transformed it into something unexpected. A silent tear ran down her face. "The rules wouldn't be any clearer," she whispered, repeating her own words. "No," he agreed, a small smile playing on his lips. "They would be chaos, and I can't wait." Their journey was no fairy tale. The outside world was cruel. The gossip press devoured them. Arthur's friends treated him like a pariah. His family threatened to disinherit him. It was a constant battle against prejudice, against the invisible barriers of class and power. There were moments of doubt, heated arguments, moments when the chasm between their worlds seemed insurmountable. But they had music, and they had each other. Arthur encouraged her to return to school. He didn't sponsor her. Instead, he restructured her finances so she could support herself and pay for her lessons. He wanted the achievement to be hers, and hers alone. He learned to listen, not just to her music, but to her words, her fears, her dreams. He learned to cook, to shop at the supermarket, to find joy in the simple things money couldn't buy. Helena, in turn, learned to trust. She learned to allow herself to be vulnerable, to accept help without feeling diminished. She taught Arthur what true passion was, what it meant to fight for something with all your soul. She took him out of his ivory tower and showed him the real Rio de Janeiro, her Rio. A year later, Helena stood on the stage of the Municipal Theater. It wasn't a gala recital sponsored by Arthur Montenegro. It was a competition for new talent that she had won on her own merit. The theater was packed. In the front row, Arthur watched her, not as the billionaire who owned the world, but as the man who loved her. He wasn't her patron. He was her biggest fan. Helena placed her hands on the keyboard. She looked out at the audience, met his eyes, and smiled. Then she began to play, the same Chopin Ballade No. 1. But this time, the music didn't just contain fury and pain. It contained hope. It contained redemption. It contained love. The music told their story. At the end, the theater erupted in applause. Helena bowed, tears flowing freely. Later, backstage, Arthur embraced her. "You were magnificent," he whispered. "So," she said, a mischievous glint in her eye. "That proposal of yours, is it still on?" Arthur laughed, a genuine, joyful sound. He knelt right there on the dusty backstage floor and pulled a small box from his pocket. It didn't contain a boulder-sized diamond, but a simple, elegant ring. "Helena da Silva," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "You are the music of my life. You taught me that the greatest value lies not in what one possesses, but in what one feels. I don't want to marry you because you played the piano. I want to marry you because, without you, my life is nothing but silence. Will you marry me?" And amid the echo of distant applause, the woman who had once been invisible gave her answer to the man who had finally learned to see. Yes. The promise, born of arrogance, was now fulfilled, transformed by the redemptive power of music and the most unlikely of loves. Fazioli on the Leblon penthouse was no longer an object of silence, but a testament to the fact that sometimes the most extraordinary melody begins with a single note of defiance. Did you enjoy this story? Share your thoughts in the comments below and tell us which city you're following us from. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel. It's new, and with your help, we'll grow together. Thank you so much for watching.